Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. So this is video number 3 in this series, and it's a continuation from the last video, talking about panels and how to manipulate them and dock them and auto hide and so forth. So the focus on this video will be the panels that surround the content area, the script area, if you will. They're very important, or just as important as the others, and obviously you'll touch or interact with them possibly on a daily basis if that's what your coding requires. Now, there are some panels here that you may not get to right away, especially if you're new with PowerShell or if you're new with the PowerShell Studio IDE. But I think it's worthwhile kind of looking at because one, you're going to see these if you do have the default view, so if you're just starting out, and if you don't need them, it's real estate that you can sort of get back for your actual coding environment or your scripting window that you need. So let's go ahead and start by taking a look at the project panel here. As you can see, that this is, again, by default going to show up for you on the left hand side here, and it's blank. Well, the reason why it's blank is because I'm actually not working in a project. In fact, I'm looking at a PSF, which is a forms application. In fact, if I go to the designer, you can see the actual application here. And in fact, let me just, you know what, I'm going to close out all of these guys here because I just don't need that. Give us some extra space to work with. So you can see that this is the form here, and I've got the window here, and I can get to all of the attributes or properties for the form. But if I go into the script window, or if I'm in designer view, it doesn't really make a difference for the project panel. Again, the reason being is that I'm not working in a project. Now, if I actually close this out here, let's go back to the start page, and let me open up one of the projects here for a quick second. When I do, you can see I've invoked the project. That's definitely there, but I haven't actually opened up any of the application windows or any of the script windows, excuse me. And on the left-hand side, I finally have something enabled now, or live, for the project panel. I can actually go ahead and open up the project folder and manipulate the files at the Explorer level. I can also create a new folder within the actual parent folder itself, and here I can add an existing file if I have an existing PSF or PS1 script or XAML or an assembly or another binary that I need to save into the project. I can certainly do so, and then here I can create a new file. And if I click on new file for a second, I want to show you the new file window that comes up because I think this is important. Now from here, and this is the behavior here within this IDE closely resembles that of Visual Studio Code or Visual Studio, whatever flavor you happen to have used in the past, whereby you can create files based on the type of project or language that you're working in. This is PowerShell, so obviously PowerShell is what's going to be here. You can create a manifest file, as you can see, a module script. You can create a class that you can invoke when needed. You can do an actual script file, a PS1 file, and you can do a service script as well that is used for creating a service package or the engine for it. And then you can go into the forms. And by default, there's a bunch of templates here that you can use. You can use a wizard style text box. You can do something like tab control, and you get a little preview here of what that's going to look like. Obviously, you can click on any one of these, give it a name, click add, and it'll add it right to your project, and you can begin working on it. Right? Let's go ahead and cancel this out. Now, for us, or for the folks out there that are well set in their ways and they've been using PowerShell or this IDE for a while, project panel will most likely be open as you work through your code, because obviously, as I said, you want to kind of separate out your work into a project with multiple files, especially if you're going to have hundreds of lines of code or thousands of lines of code. So that is definitely a necessity. And of course, you can also search here. You can type in text and search. So if I say main, it'll show you the main form, and I can invoke that if I need to. For you, if you are new to the language or if you're new to the IDE, this may be extra real estate that you can gain back or that you can get back to help you out. You can obviously close out of the projects panel here like we've done so in a previous video and get that real estate back, or the Object Explorer might be really important for you, which we'll take a look at next, and you might want to see the full list of that or a larger list of it. So you may want to actually have the entire list like this displayed for you, where it's easier to scroll. Again, you still have the project panel, it's right here, but this may be a better layout for your needs. So definitely play around with them and see what works best for you, especially as you start out, and then know that in the future, if you need to manipulate it further still, you can do that, right? So I'm just going to go ahead and go back to view here just to kind of refresh the memory, go to layout and say default layout, bring everything back to what it needs to be. In fact, I'll clear out the code here. Okay, so next I want to take a look at the Toolbox panel here that's to the top left, sort of hidden away, if you will, if you're not paying attention for it. And the toolbox is very, very important, especially if you're going to be creating Windows GUI-based applications in the IDE. And, you know, my thought process would be that if, you know, in the default panel, this should really be out there for folks rather than kind of hidden away at the top, because if you're creating a form application, you're going to have to use it, right, at some point. So let's go ahead and take a look at that. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go ahead and hover over it, and you can see that I do have a bunch of controls here. They're called .NET controls, and you know, things like buttons and charts and folders and group boxes and stuff, picture boxes, progress bars. So there's a big list here, and obviously I can invoke any or all of them onto my forms, but right now it's disabled. The reason for that is because I actually don't have a form that's open that I can utilize. It's smart enough to kind of know that. So let me just go ahead and let's bring up the settings form here. You can see it's a blank form. And now when I hover over the toolbox, all of them are quote unquote alive and I can use them. So I can just drag over, say, a button if I need it, or here's a checkbox, you know, and you can go ahead and use any other controls to your desire. So obviously, when I do invoke them, I do want this menu to be available for me. I don't really want to, you know, wait for it to pop out and change the time for it and all that, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go ahead and click on the pin here and let it be pinned to the actual panel window here, or the side edge of the IDE. If I wanted to combine the toolbox and the project, well, that's simple, right? I can go ahead and just drag it over and sort of mix the two together, if you will, and now I've got the toolbox that I can invoke any control from, and I've got the project files. Or if I just want one, I can go ahead and close out the project panel, and as you can tell, I have the toolbox to work with exclusively. Now, in the toolbox panel itself, you've got three sort of subsections, if you will. The first one is the controls. That's what you're currently looking at. The other one is the control sets. Now, these control sets are designed or created primarily by Sapien, the folks at Sapien Technologies, right? In fact, if I hover over all of them, or any of them really, they give you sort of a description, and then they say created by, and you can kind of see it. I do not believe there are any third-party ones in here. I think all of these are created by Sapien as of the recording in this version. But obviously that could change in the future. And these are really helpful. These are actually really, really good to use because one, they're standardized code or chunks of code. They'll perform one or multiple actions for you already. And it saves you time in writing all this code out, right? Because at the end of the day, you do want to get a finalized or running app or script that you can actually use in your job or the task that you need, right? Here, let's take a quick look at one or two of them really. So here's a menu button, and essentially it says it inserts a button that'll display a menu when pressed, right? So if you want a menu button, I can go ahead and click that here, and you can see it's got a little drop down arrow, and then I can actually go ahead and edit that control out and give it the menu options with links and whatever else you need with icons and images to display as well. You can also start a job. So if I drag this guy over here, you can see that this is a let me just extend the window here. This is a start job, so when you click on it, it'll actually shift the text to the right, give you a little progress circle, and perform a job for you. So this way that it doesn't lock up your application, you can kind of run something in the background. So a whole slew of other, sort of options to select from, or control sets as it's labeled here, right? And the third one here is just a select that you can go ahead and do so. And when you click on the select one, what you'll notice is that it's going to present to you all of the controls that it sees from the actual page you're looking at. What I mean by that is every single control that's in this form right now, or on this form, or attached to it, or linked to it, is going to be available here. So for instance, if I want to go ahead and look at the properties of a control, which we'll actually discuss a little bit more in detail in just a minute or two, I can go ahead and just say I want the start timer. And so I'll select the start timer here, and notice that the start timer control has now a highlight around it, right? A rectangular highlight around it. And of course the properties have indicated as well. So I'll go ahead and say, let's go ahead and choose the button 1 that I just discussed, right? Or even let's say the start job. Right, you can see that the start job has been highlighted, and if I look at the right hand side here, here are all of the properties for that control. And I can go ahead and change out the text or whatever other properties that you need to. So it's really kind of useful to get to, but at the same time I can simply click on the control itself from the menu and then get to the properties if I need to. So multiple ways to do the same exact thing. So recapping, the toolbox is actually very important, especially if you're going to be working with forms. And I suggest that once you do start getting into that world, which of course will be one of the main reasons why you buy Sapien Powershell Studio, so why you buy this IDE, I would recommend maybe just instead of auto hide for the toolbox, maybe just set it as one of the panels, static panel, so this way you can access the controls much easier or easily for your project. All right, so that takes care of the toolbox. Let's go ahead and take a look at the object browser next. Okay, so the object browser is essentially a way for you to implement or invoke script for many different type of objects within the .NET framework, for databases, and even just PowerShell in general. Let's take a look at the 4 sort of sub-tab sections that we have here. The first one is the main PowerShell object browser, and it's actually split up into 4 different sections. You've got a snap-in here. In fact, this is the web deployment snap-in, and you can see that it's running version 9.0. There's actually a version that's listed for every one of these instances, so you can kind of keep track of that if you need to. The second is modules, and while I'm showing you these sections here, please take note of the actual icons that they're listed as, because it might kind of give you an idea of what you're working with. So in the case of the cogwheel with the red background, you're referring to a module. If it's the cogwheel in front of a blue, then you can see that it's a commandlet. And then, of course, you can see the About Topics icon as well with the question mark. Going back into the modules here, you can see that you can actually dive down. So if you look at the agent here, you can scroll down or expand, and then you can actually see all of the functions that you can invoke. And it's actually very simple to do. Let's say if you want to enable an agent, you can just drag and drop, or you can right-click and say Insert, and it'll do the very same thing for you. So those, again, there's a whole list of them, and generally speaking, the way that I've sort of come to utilize the object browser is basically depending on the project or script that I'm working on. Over time, a script will come across your desk, or you'll have a couple of requirements that you need to fulfill, in the case of, say, connecting to a database. So at that point, you will then come into the object browser, click on the database tab, and then build a connection out and utilize the connection going forward. Until then, really, you wouldn't be expected to remember every single one of these instances, which you'll see in just a second from Wmi is too many to count, essentially. So that's the modules there. The core commandlets is actually an amalgamation of everything. It's got the modules, it's got commandlets, and it's got functions as well. It really just depends on what you're looking for. So for instance, if you want to do the copy or convert to XML, in fact, when you hover over it, it actually tells you that it's going to create an XML based object. And again, you can just right click and say insert, and it'll insert in for you. The moment you hit the space key or the space button on your keyboard, you'll be presented with the information for the parameters, whether they're mandatory or not, and it can help you build out the commandlet for you. So let me just go ahead and delete that here. And again, there's a bunch here to use. Like if you want to export to CSV or export to CLI, you can actually do a search as well if you need to. And again, not expected to memorize all these. You probably won't use all of these or many of them from your day-to-day experience, but it is good to know that it's here so you can kind of search for it. So if you have something that you need to do with export, say I need to export something, you can come in here, type out the word export, and it'll present what it finds for you, including modules that may reference them. And so you can kind of build out your code in a logical manner with the help of this browser. Let's go ahead and take a look at the, actually, I'm sorry, let me just go back into the help commands here. Let me exit this out. And let's take a look at the first one on the list, or the top one. These are the help topics. Essentially, if you opened up a PowerShell session and you did a help about underscore and then the command, it'll tell you, it'll give you a whole list of it. So let me give you an example here. Here's about break. So if you went into the console and you did help about underscore break, it would give you this exact page here. In fact, let me see if I can kind of expand this window here a little bit. So you kind of get the topic, short, long description, get some examples of where and when you can use that, what to expect, and a bunch of other information that you would also get, including some see also suggestions. So you can go through the list here, and as you can tell, there are many to pick from. And again, you can use the search to kind of narrow down what you're looking for, and then utilize the script. And importing it or injecting it into your script is very easy. Again, just right click and say insert, and then go from there. So a bunch of kind of helpful topics there to go over. Now, I'm assuming that as the updates come out from Sapien, you'll probably get a bunch of these added as the language sort of updates itself, right? Microsoft adds changes. I'm sure it'll come into this section as well. So let's go ahead and take a look at the .NET. Now, the .NET has a bunch of assemblies, which is essentially a DLL file that you can share, that's meant to be shared exactly. So you'll see that there's things like accessibility or Microsoft.build, or even the system, which I want to show you right now. So here's the system assembly here, and actually you can see that there's a green check mark, and what that means is that the green check mark implies that it actually is included in the script. So you can actually see that it's checked off here. Now if I expand this out, what you'll see is you'll see a bunch of different icons. So here's two brackets followed by what looks like some tags. And if you hover over each section, you'll actually see what that is. So for instance, this Microsoft.C# as an example is a namespace. For those of you that are familiar perhaps with C# or coding, you'll know exactly what that is. There's a namespace, and within that namespace, of course, you'll get a class. Within the class, you'll get methods or properties that you can invoke. Let me see if there's a property with this. Yeah, these right here with the wrench icons, those are properties. And you can invoke each and every one of them to get the required information you're looking for. Again, there is a whole slew of them to go through, and of course, like the others, you really only use it when you need to for a very specific reason. Okay, the Wmi Browser is very helpful for you, especially when you're starting out. You can use Sim, but that's, I guess, a topic for another discussion. But the idea behind Wmi, the Object Explorer, if you will, is that you can do the same thing. You can search through all of these classes, if you will, and then break them down to the properties that you need, and then you can right click. Incidentally, if you do hover over them, you do get a pretty lengthy description of what they do, which I think is great because it kind of gives you an idea of what to expect from it. The WMI namespace, just the number of classes I think are in the thousands. So really, you know, you wouldn't be able to sit there and read through all of them unless you were having trouble falling asleep. So you can invoke them here, and just like any other one in this browser panel, you can just right-click and insert, or go to the MSDN help for it and learn about it a little bit more. So again, a bunch to choose from and go through, which I think is great to have when you need it. The last tab here is actually for databases, which means that you can invoke a connection to a database, but right now I actually don't have one. So if I were to click on this link here, this icon here, what I will get is a database connection build screen. And essentially what this is that you can choose your type of database that you have, Access, SQL, MySQL, Oracle, and the rest, and then build out the connection string, the server name, login, username, password, database name, you know, the normal sort of parameters that you would need for connecting to a database. And of course you can test the connection as well. Actually this is going to time out in just a few seconds here when it realizes it can't actually talk to the database because it doesn't exist. I haven't filled out any information. So you can always you can also edit the connection string as well, and then have that saved for you in this list. And then when you require it, you can just drag it in and continue with your code building. In terms of usability, as you can see, this is sort of like an ad hoc approach here. It's not something you would really use every single day or minute, especially if you're building out some standard scripts or even some commandlets or functions that do very specific things. So that's the object browser window here, or the panel, and hopefully you guys can kind of figure out if this is something you need as part of a static layout, or if you can get rid of it and add in another panel that might help you a little bit more as you go through your project. So we're going to go ahead and take a look at the properties panel next. It's a fairly involved panel, and we'll go ahead and check out what it has to offer for us in the next section. Okay folks, so this section of the video is going to concentrate on the properties panel. Now the properties panel is one of those ones that you'll probably use every single day, only because if you're interested in creating the WinForms applications, you're going to be in this panel every single time you drag and drop an element or a control onto your application or onto the canvas, and you have to edit it, name it, set a number of different settings, or properties rather, so you'll be in this panel quite a bit. So I just want to kind of focus on that for this video, or for this section I should say. So let me go ahead and just click on the properties title bar, and I'm going to go ahead and sort of give it a little bit more real estate here, and I'm going to resize this so we can see it when we do get some data populated in there. Now this is empty, of course, because it has nothing to relate to or no properties to show you. I'm going to go ahead and open up this test3 here for a second, and when I do load it, this is an actual WinForms script or an application. However, it's still blank. Reason is because we are actually looking at the script section rather than the designer section. So if you do click on the designer, everything comes to life, right? And we'll start at the top here just to kind of work our way down. You can see that there's a drop down here, and if you click on it from the list, these are all of the elements or controls that you can actually interact with or configure should you need to. So you can actually highlight one or select one, and you can see that on the canvas itself, it actually will show you visually that, yep, you've picked this browse dialog button. And you can go ahead and go into its properties and change the behavior, data, the style, the background, whatever you need to do to make it match to your aesthetic line for the application or the logic behind it. And when you're done with that, you can just click on the drop down again and work through your next one and next one until you're done. Now there are two ways to sort these properties, this list of properties here. One, you can do them through the category, where it shows you like the header here, accessibility, appearance, behavior, and so on. Or you can actually alphabetize the list. And really, this depends on you as a programmer, what your style is. I mean, some folks like to just see everything in alphabetical order. So if I want to look at the name or the text, rather, I know that it's in this bottom section here, and I can go ahead and update that value. Right? It really depends on what you prefer, so I'll leave that to your choice. Now, in the properties panel, there's really two main sections, if you will, that you're going to focus on depending on the element or the control you're working with. The first one is actually called the properties, and this is highlighted for you by default, right? This is what you see here. So all of these properties that you can change or modify and update. The second is the events. And the events are just that. They're events that take place because of. In this case, this is a button, so there's an event that takes place because of a click, or because of a drag and drop, or because of a font change, or because of a mouse click, or a key press. Whatever those instance events may be, this is essentially allowing you to write some code. And just as an example here, you can see that if the user were to click this button here, it would call this function, this button browse folder underscore click, and whatever code or PowerShell code is within this function, it'll go ahead and invoke and perform for the user. So these are the two sections here that really you would kind of work in for each and every control/element in your application. And you're most likely going to switch back and forth if you need to. In my personal experience, what I would have liked to have seen Sapien do is maybe split these two into a tabbed section or something like that, or maybe like a split section so I kind of have both of them at the same time instead of having to click on one and going and making my changes, then click on this and so forth. This is a perfect time to kind of bring up another point here. There may be a shortcut to this. There may be a hotkey or something like that that could be possible. This is an in-depth application, and so I don't know everything behind it. But if it is, then fantastic, and hopefully you guys can let me know if you do know of that, and I can increase my knowledge base as well. So yeah, so these are the two kind of sections that you'll work in primarily, properties being the main one. Once you're done with the changes, you can go ahead and just click out of it or away from it and move on to your next element or next step. So properties panel, again, to recap, very important, probably going to be interacting with it daily basis, hourly basis, whenever you create a Windows Form application. So don't be afraid to use it. Don't be afraid to test. I mean, it's, there's no harm in creating a test project or a test WinForm project or script and just working through these properties. Just throw a button onto the canvas and just work through them and see what you can do. Change the icon, the forecolor, the background, even the events, and play around with them and see, what you can do with the click or a mouse change or button down. Whatever the case may be, I would definitely recommend kind of becoming as familiar as possible with these properties and events for your controls, because it'll make your life that much easier and your coding experience much faster. Okay, so that takes care of the properties here. In fact, I'll bring this down into this here for a quick second. In fact, default layout. And what we'll do next is take a look at the functions and snippets panel. And actually, we'll bring this out here so we can read a little bit more. These are actually two panels that are separated here in two tabs. So we can go ahead and take a look at those two next. All right, so our last section here for these panels that we're going to look at is the functions and the snippets. Now, they are two separate panels that are sort of linked together here in a tabbed format. And again, the reason why they're here is because the assumption from Sapien is that you're most likely going to use these when you start building out your applications. So let's go ahead and take a look at the functions first. In fact, in order for me to do that, let me bring up just one of the sample scripts here for a second, and I'll also increase this the width of the window here just so you guys can see that a little bit better. Now, the function is actually pretty straightforward. Again, you have your search bar that you can search for your particular function or event if that's what you need to do. You can also create new ones. You can say insert a function. You can say edit a function. So if you highlight one of this, you'll see that it becomes available, that you can edit it. And then you can import functions from another location as well. Now, if you actually want to highlight an actual function here, if you right click this function in particular and you can say go to declaration, which basically means it's going to take you directly to the section of the code that the function was first instantiated or created. You can also find all references, which would give you a list and kind of have you go through wherever it was called. And then of course you can also insert it if it's not actually in the current document or current script or program that you are currently working on. And then you can always also edit or copy and rename if you need to. You can also create comment-based help on this, which I think is actually helpful for those of you who are new to PowerShell or just new to programming. The one bit of information or help or suggestion that I can offer without a doubt is comment. It's incredibly important for you to add comments that are, not necessarily pithy, but just informative to whoever is going to look at the code, even if it is you months down the road. With busy lives and work and everything else going on, you can write a piece of code or write an application or a tool that might be several hundred lines long, or even several files or pages, and 6, 7, 10 months, a year from now down the road, you're looking at a particular function or you're looking at a variable and you want to see the scope that it has within the entire application, and you may not be able to tell right away, right? Unless of course you have an idyllic memory. But if you don't, comment everything that you do so that this way down the road you yourself can quickly get an idea of what a specific function or event or variable is actually there to do. So let's go back to this here. So just as a quick demo here, if I right click and I go to declaration, you can see that add process tracker is right here, and takes you right to it. Here's some comments about what it does, but we don't need to see that at the moment. But it does definitely have taken you right to the function itself that you can work on. And the same is true rather for the events. in that you have the events listed here, and you can right click and you can do the same thing. Go to declaration and see what it's going to do, and then you can actually right click and rename and copy, and you can insert it into the current project if it's not already there. Or if you want to add another instance of it as well. I mean, it's not just for new projects or new scripts. Okay, so there is no right-click menu in here. There's nothing that you can do here. You can just have these three options. And as your project grows, obviously this list will as well. And it is linked to the actual file or the script that you're currently looking at. So obviously I have many more pages or scripts in here and forms, but this is only looking at the functions and events available for test3.psf. So do be aware of that as you're going through this list. Okay, let's go ahead and take a look at Snippets, which is actually pretty straightforward and also very helpful. It's similar to the object browser in that it's going to give you pre-formatted, pre-created chunks of code that do very specific things, and this way it allows you to write your code faster. It's well organized, structured, and kind of get you on your way to completing the script. So this is a very typical sort of snippet that you would use from time to time. It's a try catch or a try catch finally, and essentially what it does is it'll allow you to try a piece of code, catch an error, and then finally perform one or many actions. So if I wanted to insert it, in fact, I'll just go ahead and close out all these things here, and I'll enter a few times. If I wanted to insert a try catch or try catch finally, just right click on it and say insert, and you can see that PowerShell Studio has done a few things for you. One, it's created the structure for the actual snippet, giving you a place to get some help on it if you would like. You can then try your commands here. You can catch the exception or the IO exception, and then tell it what you want it to do. So all of these snippets that's provided for you is essentially the same exact way. It'll kind of walk you through the process of how to use the snippet so that this way you can put it into your code. You can inject it into your script and your application. And in like fashion, you have a bunch of them. There's stuff for WMI, validation, utilities if you want. There's stuff for the GUI. There's stuff for the database here if you'd like to go do that. SQL delete query, insert query. In fact, let me just go ahead and just delete this out here real quick. Give us some real estate. Let's go ahead and insert this insert query here. And you can see that it does that for you. In fact, it even highlights the columns. And if you hit tab, it'll actually cycle through all the values that you should update in order for it to quote-unquote work. So you do have a bunch of, again, a bunch of snippets that you can go through. You can also import, you can refresh here if you'd like, the list. You can open a snippet folder, and you can also create a new snippet. Now, creating a new snippet is essentially for you. So if you have a particular chunk of code or function or number of lines of code that you use often that does a very specific job or specific list of tasks, you can go ahead and create one and go ahead and import it, and it'll save to the list here. So yeah, that's pretty much it, and covers the snippet window. So likely use of it will be once in a while until you get more familiar with PowerShell, and at that point it'll be really easy to kind of add these in, and it'll definitely save you time when you start coding your applications. Alright, so that pretty much does it for the panels around the center. This is going to be a little bit longer video than the rest of the ones in the series, only because I try to cover the panels in total, and I hope you guys liked and enjoyed the video. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. Also like and subscribe if you guys do enjoy the material, and I will talk to you guys in the next one.